I was going to start talking about, I named my talk Lean on Me, and I was going to start having us all sing that song, Lean on Me, and we thought about doing it this morning and we made another choice. You know how the chorus goes, what is it? You just call on me, brother. When you need a hand, we all need somebody to lean on. And that's a wonderful concept, of course. That's part of interdependence. So, a couple things contributed to what I wanted to share this morning, and the usual thing happened. On Tuesday, it was one track. On Wednesday, it was another. On Thursday and Friday and Saturday and so on. Because this idea of interdependence actually showed up in life so many times. I really had to decide which one I was going to talk about. Thinking about that, I picked up a book from Meg Wheatley, Margaret Wheatley, PhD. She's a woman who wrote, among other things, a book called Leadership and the New Science, which is fantastic. She's an organizational psychologist. And she looks at how organizations and human beings can learn from nature, from how nature works already so beautifully. And if we take a cue and a clue from how nature operates and bring that into our homes and our classrooms and our workplaces, we can experience some of that same harmony rather than fighting against what is. Fantastic book. She wrote another one, which is what I'm referring to today. It's called Turning to One Another. And it's all about interdependence. She's been all around the world and worked with people everywhere from corporate boardrooms to out in the bush, sat in circles, in chairs and on logs, been with all kinds of people and helping them to resolve differences, to discover commonalities, to move forward and grow together. And she's watched amazing things happen in her work. So she wrote this book called Turning to One Another in 2002. And she said, I think it's time. I think it's time. And the reason that she wrote it is because not only from the inspiration of her own work, but from the recognition of who we all used to be. She said, we used to do everything together. When we lived in caves, and when we lived in groups on the plains, and when we lived in nomadic bunches, and when we lived in villages, and when we lived in these smaller groups, even small towns, we used to do things together. We'd know one another. We'd go through things together. We would work out, find our way beyond anything together. And our lives have gotten so busy, and most of our families, just because of our evolution of how we work and where we work and what we do and what it involves. You know, even that 3-story, 3-generation family home in the suburbs is a thing of the past. It's now subdivided for offices or college apartments, you know, that kind of thing. I remember when we were growing up, we used to visit relatives outside of Boston who had a home like that. And our grandmother lived in an apartment on the very top floor, and then the next generation lived on the main floor. And we all came to visit and ran all over the place, and you know, there was everything there, and everyone was there. And we knew one another, and we took care of one another, and we moved through things together. I think all of us have some kind of a memory of a portion of life being that way. As we've moved forward through the Industrial Revolution and so much more since then, we don't all live in one place. We're not all connected in the same way. I'm afraid to admit I don't even know my next door neighbors, and we have adjoining buildings. We smile and wave if we end up in the parking lot at the same time. But to go knock on the door and say, hi, I'm new here, or for one of them to come knock on my door and say, I noticed you're new here, I've even lost that. What Meg Wheatley is saying is that if we begin to remember those things, we have an opportunity to remember how to be together. And if we can do that, believe it or not, so many of the issues and the challenges that are facing humanity in this world right now can and will be resolved. It is through interdependence. And it's not some fancy thing that we have to study in textbooks and learn how to do. It's actually something that we can remember, either from our own earliest experiences or simply by hearing the tales of our elders, or looking into the diaries and the writings of people from a little while ago, or from anywhere on the planet where people are still living together. There's something that we can learn from that. She says that we all have 4 basic yearnings, regardless of where we've ended up, what kind of lifestyles we're living, where we're at in all of this. One of them is that we have a desire to learn. Don't we? We want to figure things out. We always want to know something. Perhaps what we want to know has just been directed in other directions, but we all have a desire to learn something. The second one is that we want freedom. How wonderful that we get to sit here and talk about whatever we want. We get to sit here and believe whatever we want. And just in case we forgot how extraordinary that is in this day and age, we took the time a few days ago and do right in this moment to say, wow, that is awesome. I can stand up here and you can sit there and we can talk about things that not everyone agrees with. And it's okay. Because we live in this extraordinary country that was founded on this idea that we should be free to think and to believe as we choose, and to have opportunities made to us equally. So that's where we get to start from. Freedom. The third thing is meaning. No matter who you are, where you are, in your career path, retirement, going back to school, considering a change, whatever it is, perhaps you just arrived in this area, whatever it is, there is a desire within each of us to experience meaning. Once again, where we seek it and where we find perhaps a watered-down version of it may not be the ultimate, but that desire is within each of us for meaning. And the last one, which could be first, is that desire for love. Because something within us, no matter how buried it might be, knows that we are love. That love is the substance of all things. That love is something that we must experience. We thirst for it. We hunger for it. We seek it. Once again, depending on where we are in our awareness and our activity, we may be finding something that allows us to feel that in a beautiful and perfect way. It could be gardening or painting or preparing a meal. It could be caring for her child. It could be educating others. It could be writing a book. It could be sewing something. It could be going out on the water. It could be so many things. But we all have that desire for love. So Meg Wheatley is saying that if we begin by recognizing those 4 desires for learning, for freedom, for meaning, and for love, we can begin to come back to our roots. We can learn how to come back together. And it doesn't mean that we give up who we have become. It means that something else happens. It's really the next step from independence. If we go back to the beginning of most of our lives' experience, of course we have a phase of dependence. In dependence, we learn and we are free, and there is meaning and there is love. In dependence, we learn how to live in our bodies and in this world. In dependence, we have the freedom to discover what it's all about. In dependence, we... goodness, I got them backwards again. We start to form ideas about what things mean. And in dependence, we have our first impressions about what love is. As you can imagine, at this stage in human history, those experiences may have been of the perfect beaver cleaver, partridge family, or whatever variety, or maybe not. We move into the next phase, the one we long for when we're teenagers. Oh, if I could just be on my own and make my own decisions and do my own thing and be independent. And boom, we arrive at that place. Sometimes sooner than we would like, and sometimes reluctantly. Whatever the case may be, we arrive at this place called independence. And in independence, we have the same opportunities. We have the opportunities to learn what that really means. Oh my goodness, what it involves that we hadn't considered. We get to learn from our choices and our experiences. In independence, we find meaning. We may, before I talk about meaning, let me go back to freedom. We have that freedom. We get to make those choices. And once again, of course, it's tied to the learning. In independence, when we exercise our freedom, we discover more of how things work. We may discover that freedom is not all we thought it would be, maybe not all it's cracked up to be. And we long for some connection. Meaning, when we're independent, shifts a little. If you imagine that you're somewhere in your first experiences of being independent, you carry with you that idea of what has meaning and value from when you were a child. And then you question some, you keep some, you throw some away. You may not realize you have any choice at all. And maybe you get to do some work about what has meaning and value. Maybe start to identify your values and your priorities as different from your parents. There's something in sociology that says that we're afraid to rise above the level of success that our parents had, that our community had, that our village had, that our tribe had, because there's something dishonorable about that. And that's an old idea. Because really, what our divine parent and what really we all want for one another is to keep growing and to keep expanding and discovering more. So we may discover that our values change a little. What matters, what has meaning to us shifts in independence. We may discover something different about love when we're independent. For example, we may have some aspects of what we thought it was come up for us and be ready for review, maybe a little editing. We may experiment with what we think it is and discover that there's a little bit more work to do. We're afraid in our independence to explore what love means. We're always free to keep learning and to keep growing. Each of these stages of development lead to another. And so what they lead to, quite possibly, is not just saying, I'd like to have somebody to lean on in such a way that I am dependent. They have groups for that. If we don't know how to release dependence and then we become codependent, we haven't discovered the other part of ourselves. That's an important part of a bigger equation. Then again, if we live in isolation, if we discover, I will admit to you, I've had many periods in my life where this felt like the way to go. If I just minimize my interaction with other people, I'll be okay. They can't disapprove of me. They can't tell me that what I sound like or look like or what I believe in or what matters to me, they don't agree with it. If I just don't share, if I don't expose myself to anybody or anything, I'll be better off. Well, you know what it's like to live as an island. It's pretty lonely. Once again, it's only part of a greater equation. All of that leads us in a natural evolution to interdependence. This is where we learn how to live in the sandbox, how to play in the sandbox. I don't know how many of you grew up in the country and had a sandbox. I know I did. Anybody else? Okay. Those of us who grew up next to a beach, there's one right there. But I remember ours. And I remember the deal, we had a sandbox at home, down in the yard, sandbox at school, sandbox at every playground, and you had to learn how to play nicely with others. Did you ever have one of those report cards when you were a kid that the teacher would check off the boxes and then make comments at the end, and you got to carry it home? And you can't say you lost it on the way. I remember those. One of them was that they would check yes or no as to whether you were willing and able to play nicely with others. That's about interdependence. And when we're younger, we're still learning that. In the sandbox of life, the ultimate goal is to know how to play nicely with others. Not just to be nice, but because of what is possible for each of us when we live together that way. Think about these 4 needs, these 4 desires again, in the realm of interdependence. Learning. When I know that we need each other, learning takes on a whole new meaning. When I know that it's not about just that I need you, and you feel that, well, that's pretty awful. I think I'll get away from you, If I think I can't be without that other person. Independence. I don't need anybody. Well, that person is hard to relate to, and we've all been that person sometimes. In interdependence. What we're able to learn together, what we're able to learn about one another that we didn't know is so great. If we move into this idea of freedom in interdependence, it takes on a whole new meaning as well. If you think about it, we're so much freer. Can you get me a cough drop, please, since you're the keeper of those? Thank you. Freedom, in terms of interdependence, is different as well. Because if you're playing together in the sandbox, we've agreed to at least try to do something together that's not all about you or all about me. It's something about us. It's something greater. If we look at meaning, can you imagine that a life together, recognizing that we need one another, wouldn't that have meaning that is far beyond our own personal needs and desires? We would have the opportunity to look at how some of what we value and consider important and meaningful is different. And we would have the opportunity to discover what we're going to do about that. Besides throw sand at each other and kick somebody out of the sandbox, right? Things do get a little interesting. Thankfully, there are opportunities to learn there. There was a freedom, obviously, to learn there. And there's great meaning and value in doing it. And of course, imagine the amount of love that we can experience and share together, because love is infinite. When we let more in, when we let more pass through between us, because we're willing to know one another and to be interdependent. That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? It all sounds so like a dream off there somewhere, except for that you might have a picture of a sandbox in your mind. So how would you get there? Thankfully, Meg Wheatley again says it's actually very easy. It's called starting a conversation. Some of you may have heard of this culture, this phenomenon by now called conversation cafes. They get people together to have conversations on purpose. Don't wait until something's wrong, until there's a problem to solve, until people are practically so shut down they wouldn't even come to the table. Although people like Marshall Rosenberg work on that as well. Imagine that if you come together regularly and practice having conversations with one another, you might learn how to rediscover that vocabulary and that way of being together that allows you to move through the difficult and unexpected times instead of trying to learn it on the fly, right? So when we get together in the sandbox, and when we accept that interdependence is the aim that we have, when we say that we want to learn how to do that because the rewards are so great, the opportunities for personal fulfillment and the achievement of greater things together is really, really inspiring. Now we know that all we need to do is to begin a conversation. And she justifies even that. She goes back to those roots. She goes back to all of the people that she's worked with and says, you know what? We all have a need to give voice to our experience. We all have a desire and a need to be heard. And the other half of that equation is that what happens when we make the choice to listen to someone else? We know them better. We learn something about them we didn't know. We offer them a kind of freedom we may not have offered them before. We discover another kind of meaning we hadn't contemplated before. We discover an experience of love we hadn't known before. When we do this together, when we provide a place where it is safe for someone we know to just say what's on their heart, share what's on their mind, and they know they can do that, we discover what matters to them, what has meaning to them. We learn something that allows us to be more present in a way that we weren't before. And we're on the receiving end of that same thing. What happens? Have you ever carried something around on your mind and in your heart for days, maybe only hours, but maybe days, weeks, months? Maybe you just put it on a shelf and said, forget it, I can never talk about this one. How freeing it is to be able to let that out and no longer carry it. So these are some of the qualities of interdependence that we're talking about today. What they do for us personally is they free us up from what we've been carrying. They let our dreams out into the light of day. They let us share those with other people. They also inspire us to create a safe place for others to share their dreams with us. And not just their dreams. We need to be able to share our hopes and our fears. We need to be able to share our doubts without trying to fix one another, without trying to just say, listen, I'll take care of it. That's not what we're always after. Sometimes it's just to be heard, just to be known. This idea that all we need to do is start a conversation and we can change the world is what this all arrives at. Start a conversation and change the world. It's like the butterfly flapping its wings halfway across the world and something resulting over here. As we let go of what we've been carrying, as we make it safe for one another to be authentic, as we step out and dare to share who we really are, we stop carrying a burden. And we start spreading our wings. We start living our dreams. We start doing things that we've been inspired to do. So the opportunity today, the opportunity as we celebrate Interdependence Day, is simply to take this information home and remember when you encounter someone you know or someone you don't know, perhaps today is the day to start a conversation and see what happens. Thank you.